If you vote for me, all of your wildest dreams will come true.
Welcome, my friends, to the VFX Promotion Podcast. You'll see it when you believe it. With the exception of maybe Sean Devereaux, Jason Diamond is more on the production side than our other guests tend to be on this podcast. And like Sean, Jason has hands-on experience in both VFX and post. He and his brother are entrepreneurs and comfortable with the technical side of filmmaking, and so they've recently jumped full force into VR. I wanted to talk to Jason about how one goes about planning a shoot for post-production, whether one can afford a crew of union professionals or if it's just kind of improvising with friends and the occasional celebrity. Please enjoy my conversation with Jason Diamond. All right, Jason, hi.
What's up?
It's great to chat with you again. It's been a while on a podcast since we've done this.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this conversation, and my sort of top-level thing that I have in mind chatting with you versus all the other guests that I've chatted with is that it's sort of twofold. One aspect plays on your somewhat diverse background, even though actually I feel like you're a very serially focused guy, and you've just had more than one serial focus. Before I ask you more about that, I mean, the other thing I think overall, these days, in one way, people are very comfortable with cameras and shooting stuff all the time. And at the same time, I've run into a thing, particularly with designers, people who've worked predominantly on a screen, where knowing how to plan a shoot and also knowing how to plan a shoot the way a designer would, which is not necessarily to carefully plan everything, which is what you kind of need to do on the visual effects side. We'll talk about that, versus keeping things kind of loose. And so, I mean, you've done everything from visual effects type of work to music videos. You're now doing a very technical medium of VR quite a bit. And prior to this, you were in a pretty great band. So tell us a little bit about all that. How would you map out your career if somebody just doesn't know you at all?
I think that I am like a fire dog following my nose for the fire that interests me. In college, I didn't graduate college because I only took electives. It probably says it all, but I think I've followed a lot of opportunistic things. I think opportunity is a very huge part of my life. At the same time, those opportunistic things are driven by interest.
Right. Clearly, you have a deep interest in cameras and lenses. I mean, you know more about that than most people I know.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, movies and things. My parents are into movies, my mom especially, so we would go to the movies a lot as kids, especially in like the late 70s, early 80s, because I'm old. There were no assigned seats. There weren't any of that kind of thing. So my mom would pack, like a picnic lunch for us, and we would theater hop. We would buy a ticket to one movie and then leave the theater when it was done, and having mapped out in the newspaper, looking at the times and like doing math and little plan, figuring out where we would go next. And we would see 2, 3, 4 movies in a day.
Within one multiplex?
Yeah, I mean, small multiplexes. We were in like Pensacola and Fort Lauderdale and stuff. So, we saw movies like Star Wars in the theater and Mad Max, American Werewolf in London, and things like that. Things that had bold visuals, Outland, things that have bold visuals, style, visual effects before visual effects were really a thing. And there was really a lot of people doing them, special effects mostly, obviously, very creative storytelling. And I think that without knowing it, my brother and I sort of were honing in on the thing that we wanted to do. Also, my mom is a musician. Mm-hmm. She was a jazz singer, and she now manages jazz artists and produces albums for them and things like that. So music was a big thing in the house too. And my brother and I, as of about, I think around 9, when we moved to Pensacola, she had a jazz trio with our stepdad and another guy in a complex in Pensacola that had like 10 different musical sort of style smaller clubs under one sort of warehousey roof. And my brother and I sort of lived there from like 9 to 13 and we knew everybody, and we would, go there at night with my mom, and she'd do her thing, and we'd wander around to all the different rooms, and it was like a piano bar and some guy playing B3, and then, like a disco room because it was the 70s, and a Dixieland room, big band room, all that kind of stuff, and just sort of being immersed in music. Like we weren't a Beatles household. We were more like an R&B, Stevie Wonder kind of Motown jazz household, like Ella Fitzgerald, before the Beatles. So I think all of that sort of culminated as my brother and I got to be teens and learning how to play guitar as a teenager, and then coming to New York City as like in our, 14, 15 years old, going to CBGBs and like other things like that, seeing live music because we grew up seeing live music. So it was a natural extension in what is proudly, I will call, the greatest city in the world. Lots of live music and lots of culture and all that kind of stuff.
So a lot of comfort with artists and creative people, and kind of that being your world, like that, your natural world, both on the musical side.
Yeah, an interest in creating it, not just observing and appreciating.
Right. And I will say about 80s effects, it's true we can't call them visual effects, in that we use that term for things that are done in post-production, which in that time would have been opticals, which there was some, but we've really kind of made that synonymous with what we do on a computer now.
I mean, there were some computer effects, but not heavy duty.
But the thing about that era is it was the beginning of the how they do that kind of era, starting with Star Wars, but continuing with Poltergeist and all kinds of movies where it just was like, I mean, even to this day, you watch some of those and you're like, what the heck did they do right there?
Yeah.
That was incredible. And I think as a kid, I think it sounds like that was part of what was kind of getting your interest going to point you where you went. So tell us more about that.
Again, briefly, sort of drifted around aimlessly at different jobs and things. My brother and I ended up at a production company that had made a feature film, and they had an Avid in 1995. And a friend of ours was working there and was like, hey, you should come. I was like, I need a job, whatever you got, I don't care. And he's like, oh, well, you should. We got this thing called an Avid. And another friend of mine had told me about the Avid like 2 months before, because she worked at Red Car, which was like an editorial house here in Chicago. I think they had one at the time.
And I remember what a big deal that was
at
the time, like the Avid. I worked at a facility in that era too, where it's like, oh yeah, that's the room with the Avid.
Yeah, they're not cutting tape that's referencing film and,
right. At the same time, the Avid is a beige Mac with really special cards in it.
Yeah, and it had giant hard drives for the time, which was, I don't know they were. I forget the size, but they weren't big compared to what we have now in like the thumb drive, in your phone or whatever. And so we took the job because we happened to have heard the word Avid before.
Yeah.
we were like, oh yeah, I totally know what that is. Yeah. And, we started logging footage and all sorts of stuff on that feature. It was just shot on film and everything like that. And we worked there for a year. And by the end of that year, we cut the feature with another friend that we met during that time that was also working there, who we're still friends with. And the three of us, cut the film. We music supervised it with music they could never clear, but just to move the picture along, we put all sorts of cool music in it and stuff. And I had no idea I had an interest in editing, really. And I have no formal training in editing, or my brother, or even my friend who cut the movie. We all sort of ended up there, and they had no one who would cut their movie, because I think the editor quit after like the second week or something. And we were like, we'll do it, and they're like, okay. I think the three of us had a natural affinity for it and sort of really got excited about, oh, cool, like, reverse engineering what editing actually is, instead of going to school and being like, a match cut is this. Or what, I remember, I think it was the director. It was obviously a good exercise. And I think the director said, I was going to say, always cut on action, and we were like, okay.
Yeah.
Which, is a fairly reasonable thing when you're matching, takes or whatever. But
in the blink of an eye, it was very popular in that era. It still is, which is a more refined version of that same advice.
Yeah. So just to accelerate the story, I ended up at an ad agency after that as like an Avid guy and as an audio engineer, because I also had that background. So I was recording records and recording cues for television shows and mixing them and going to spotting sessions and pretty much just learning on the fly. Like, oh, I could do that. Someone would say, oh, can you do that? I'd just say, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I pretty much would say yes anytime anyone asked me to do something, and I would just figure it out.
And there's still some truth to that, no?
Yeah. I mean, when we got into VR, my friend at the time and now business partner, Lucas Wilson, asked my brother and I we were not business partners at the time. This is like 5 years ago. Hey, do you guys want to do a VR job? I have one. And we were like, sure, we've never done VR before and really actually don't have that much historical background in it in terms of like, you know, what was done in the 90s. And
Well, it's a lot like your Avid era where very few people really had the access to be doing much with it.
well, and certainly at a high end, I'm not saying that to disparage anyone else who was doing VR at the time. It's just we were specifically tasked with building a VR rig out of 5 or 6 Red Dragons. To your point, yes, we were tasked with something. We did some reverse engineering. The internet helped a little bit, and we found some other smart people that were willing to collaborate with us, and we learned on the job.
And you are now, I mean, that's a lot of your work now.
Yeah, well, since then, you know, my brother and I and Lucas and another partner, Doug Allenstein, we have an actual company that the 4 of us, you know, along with a few other people and a lot of, you know, gracious freelance people who like working with us. We moved in from narrative and sort of produced content, which we still do, but we now also do a lot of live streaming VR, which we do primarily for Facebook/Oculus for their venues platform. We do all the concert or 99% of the concert content and all the esports content. In the last 6 weeks, I was in Madrid streaming Billie Eilish. I was in Richmond streaming Post Malone, and then Hamburg for a week for an esports gig with ESL, and then just recently last week in Beijing for a week doing an ESL job. So we get a lot of I flew 100,000 physical miles last year, and this year, I think before I went to Beijing, the Delta lady told me on the phone that I was at 109. So there's a lot of travel.
That is a lot. Do you like it?
I mean, my family doesn't like it very much, but
Yeah.
I mean, I personally like to travel and go to see different places and cities and get paid to do it, not do it on my own nickel, although it's my company, so it's kind of on my nickel in a weird way. But the other part of that is I'm traveling with sometimes up to 8 other people or 7 other people. And all those people are, you know, we only work with people that we are friendly with. I mean, first in line is they're good at their job. And then we like them. So we want to continue working with them as well. You know, we don't work with people we don't like, because who wants to be on a trip with someone you don't get along with? It just, your skill is then superseded by your personality. So, you know, it's like going on field trips with 8 of your friends. So it can be very fun.
Well, and so where's the need for the crew of 7 or 8? Like, what kind of stuff are you guys doing? Because I've been with you on a shoot, and I got that there were things like giving multi-angle points of view on a show, the one I went to with you. I don't think but it's all real time, right? Everything that is being added to it is being done by your crew in real time. There's no post component.
No.
Is that right?
No post. It's shot and done. I mean, look, coming from a post-production background, I skipped a whole section between the mid-90s and the later 2000s where we got into VR, where we were doing a ton of post-production with our own post-production facility, as well as, you know, really honing our skills as directors for, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I skipped over that with you a little bit, but I was, in the meantime, I mean, and this is going to get into kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about, is things like music videos. And I mean, you've done a series of branded content for Sesame Street with Muppets in it. A lot of people have probably seen the Share It Maybe.
Well, and the episode, a little humble brag here, primetime special for HBO for Sesame that we produced, that we won primetime Emmys for last year, which was super cool.
Oh, congrats.
And we love all the Sesame people. They're amazing. The puppeteers are incredible performers. So anytime we get to do anything with them is always, super fun.
So taking that as an example, because that I would take to be scripted yet somewhat improvised.
Not really. So we were producing that. It wasn't storyboarded per se, although we had well over 2 weeks of prep. We were not storyboarding per se as much as we were going through, we're facilitating their prep in that case because this was a union shoot. So we had a 5-day on the street shoot, which Sesame doesn't do a lot. And so, they did some stuff in the studio, but we're planning for, 110 person union crew on the streets of New York for 5 days straight in parks in 3 different boroughs. That is a daunting task, especially not being a heavily union shop ourselves. The key to any job anywhere, and I think this goes for any profession, is hiring the right people. We're the EPs and the producers, and then we hire, a killer union production manager, production coordinators, and on down the line, all the people that are, we got lucky that the, A-list top union crew wanted to, come on our job for that week. It's interesting to say that we were the largest union shoot in New York City for a week. And all of the union heads came out to see our, check on our job and everything because they didn't know who we were. And we had all the people, and they came down, and we run a tight ship, and we, treat everybody right. And the reps left after 30 minutes to totally, satisfied that we were treating everybody fairly and following the union guidelines, et cetera. So in terms of preparation, that's really the thing you have to prep for as a producer. At least you need to make sure that your crew is well taken care of and that your ducks are in a row so that everyone can be creative without having to worry about problems. We're solving problems in the background while the crew is able to do their job and succeed. Now, myself, I focus more on like technical and creative producing, especially as an EP. So on that shoot, I was mostly on set and working with the technical crew and working with the DP and directors and other people and making sure everybody had what they needed, solving problems on the fly, because I do have the technical background to say, oh, the camera needs to do this, hold on, do this. Now, obviously, we had seasoned first ACs and DITs and all that kind of stuff, so I'm not like overstepping boundaries, but as a higher level executive, I can jump in real fast when other executives and other things are in play to solve problems pretty fast.
So if you weren't storyboarding for that particular job, which, it does sound like you're kind of taking the army out to battle. So
well, and also the director, Ben, the director, has been doing Sesame forever. And there's only a specific way to shoot the puppets, really. So it's really finding your background and then bringing the puppets into the foreground and midground as needed, because you have to hide the puppeteers. They have monitors on the floor. It's a very specific operation for them. The camera doesn't move much because the puppeteers, especially if you have like 5 puppets, that could be up to 10 or 12 people on the ground, with puppets on their hands. That is, you start boxing yourself into options. So it's really about finding the shot. Now, in that case, we did do 2 cameras. So we had wide and a tight, so we could pick up, there were humans in the scenes outside of the puppets. So you want to get, close-ups on them of kids and, non-professional actors that may only give you, 1 or 2 good takes, so you want to get them wide and tight at the same time.
And as you were you working from a script?
Yeah. I mean, it was a full script, and we had script supervisor and the whole thing. I mean, it was a by the book kind of production of everything you would want.
So how did you foresee when there was going to be something tricky that you had to jump in on?
There wasn't a lot that you could foresee because for all intents and purposes, everything was pretty standard in terms of, I'm not saying that qualitatively, but just in terms of procedurally. For the shoot, we've been working with Sesame for like 7 years. So we inherently understand their workflows. We know they obviously know what they're doing. It's really just on the day stuff when you're like, oh, this location, when we scouted it, we thought we wanted to shoot in this direction, but really we want to shoot in this direction. That kind of stuff. It's stuff that happens on a shoot where you sort of, the director, the DP, the lighting changes. All of a sudden it's a little cloudy and maybe you can't bounce light from that direction because it was all exteriors. So you had big sources, big lights banging into silks and other things like that just to balance out light. But other times you're just putting huge 20 by diffusions over the talent because it's just overhead sun. It's really that kind of problem solving. And then translating other executives' comments or needs to the crew, effectively, since they would come through me. And then I, as a technical person who can easily talk to a director, a DP, a DIT in their language, which I think is the benefit, having fulfilled all those roles at any given time, even the audio guy. I've never been a production audio guy, but I've been a, recording engineer in a studio. So I still have a general knowledge, a reasonable knowledge of what each department does. So it's easier to communicate with them, for me to do that than to go, through another producer.
So that was a case then where really the success of the project hinged on your set of contacts to put into all of those 100 plus roles, or at least supervise each area, of which there were probably at least half a dozen.
We pulled together a top level team, of all the keys through our relationships or other recommendations that then, waterfall down, and everyone picks their people, who picks their people, who picks their people.
And what was the budget on that, roughly?
Can't really say,
okay,
unfortunately, but it was very reasonable. We did not feel like we were, super hamstrung, where we have done other jobs where the budget is, the gig has eyes bigger than its budget.
Yeah, I'm curious about those. So where I was kind of going with my line of questioning here is you did everything the way really you're supposed to do it. Like, you didn't do any guerrilla shooting. You had union people in all the roles, and it's an ideal way to work because you have that type of creativity you can put in where you've got experts who are used to working in concert, and you're not going to have to change plans radically because, all of a sudden somebody doesn't want you to shoot where you are or whatever, which just wouldn't be acceptable on a job like that. But then, of course, you've done a bunch of run and gun stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that contrast a little bit.
I mean, a lot of the run and gun stuff ranges from documentary shooting for long form and short form documentary, music videos, which generally we try to get permits when possible, even if it's just for being in that area, so that if the cops show up, you can say, hey, we have a permit,
Yeah.
My personal feeling is I like small crews. And again, it depends on what you're trying to capture, obviously, but a smaller crew allows you to be really nimble. Company moves are much easier. Obviously, available light shooting gets you all sorts of stuff. We did a spot for Sony PlayStation years ago, which we storyboarded loosely, and we were able to shoot on like the roof of our building, of our office building for one setup, which, has a great, vista of like the Empire State Building, and there's not a lot of tall buildings between us and the east side. We're on the west side, so you got a great shot of the city from the roof. We were able to shoot in our stairwell in our building, and we could do like a really clean white room plus tabletop shoot for that, which we were able to talk to the people in the building and say, hey, do you have any empty spaces, empty offices in the building that we could like basically have for a day for free? And they're like, yeah, go to, floor whatever, room whatever, and it's yours for, that day. We brought in, one art department person to say to the building, hey, we're going to paint that wall white. It's already white, but we're going to make it like whiter and clean. And they're like, yeah, go ahead. I mean, what do they care? So that kind of stuff. And then we had to do some shots of someone using a device in a park. And we just, went to the park with like 4 people and shot what we needed to shoot. No permits, nothing, but just being mindful of not drawing attention to ourselves, not being obviously under those auspices, not being loud and disrespectful to other park goers, trying to limit what the footage we're getting to something that is achievable. We're not going to have somebody running, full speed through the park because that's obviously going to draw attention and other things like that. And those weren't shots that we needed anyway. But, just trying to be reasonable with what we're doing. We have done crazy stuff before. Never anything unsafe, because there's just no reason to do that, because all you need is for someone to get hurt and everyone's going to say, shit, we shouldn't have done that. Outside of, obviously, we don't want anyone getting hurt or injured. There are a multitude of other things that come with that, and there's just no reason for it.
It's funny, you're reminding me of a couple of things. One, we did a little shoot for this course for a fictional device called Screenless that is a display that's right on your skin like a tattoo and works like a phone. And we shot it in this little town square. Was it Newton? One of the little Boston surrounding towns. And just like you described, not permitted, with a red, a little crew, pretty light footprint. Just, basically not the kind of thing we were right outside City Hall. So honestly, if we weren't really trying to get away with anything exactly. Whereas, your story about, people getting injured reminds me of a story when I worked for George Lucas. There was a in-company screening of THX 1138, which you mentioned earlier. And he talked about why he's famous for hating sets with 200 people milling around. But at the same time, he said the problem with shooting indie style is that somebody has to go and be a hero. And in that case, there's a shot of a guy on a motorcycle who collides with a car in a tunnel and flips full over the car, like full body flip. And it's like, and the guy really did that. And George's like, yeah, the guy really did that. and like,
I mean, he was a stuntman, or no? That guy just
he was, but he wasn't supposed to do that.
Yeah,
So, and he was okay, but it was almost like, okay, we're done shooting for today. We got lucky. Yeah, we got to stop now.
I mean, we've done a bunch of helicopter shoots, and stuff where the budget can't afford like a big shot over, gimbal off the front of the chopper. So, you get a little Tyler mini mount and you just lock the door open with obviously safety professionals as part of our crew, strapping me into a harness and locking that harness into the floor of the helicopter and sitting on the edge of the edge of the door open out with my legs out on the skids and holding the camera, which is safety to the thing, and just like a pilot gunner, shooting my shots, which is incredible. It's amazing to do that. It gets a little cold up there. You don't think about it, but there's really only two ways that's going to go. You're either going to be fine or you're going to fall out of the helicopter. So there's no middle ground on that. So you just kind of,
I guess dropping the camera but staying in the helicopter wouldn't really be an acceptable middle ground. No.
No. Probably not. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, so we're talking to designers and people getting into visual effects and to some extent planning their own shoots, and I think often with low or no budget. And I'm curious about how you go about breaking down a shot that is, like a non-obvious shot. And you can use any example you like, but I'm really curious. I think even just at a basic level, it's common in my experience for artists to kind of know in their mind what they want the shot to look like, but it's difficult to break that down into how do we actually shoot this?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously like anything, it comes from experience, even without visual effects or shot breakdowns, reading a script or a brief or whatever it is, a 30-second commercial or feature film, doesn't really matter. There are still shots in there. I'll use a commercial that we did which had a budget, but I think it's kind of irrelevant what the budget was in terms of planning, because that just changes your choices, but it doesn't change how you approach it, because you just have different options for your solutions, but you still have to solve the problem. So it was a spot we did for actually our current business partner, Doug, in Supersphere, had a commercial production company called Visual Nomad, and my brother and I would direct toy commercials for his company. And we did one for Simon that was supposed to be, because the Simon was all touch at that point. You didn't have to push buttons, so it had swipes and all sorts of, different actions you could do. And the brief was we wanted like a sci-fi thing where the Simon maybe is a UFO or something. And I don't know, they had a script about all the power goes out in this neighborhood, and these kids are drawn outside, and this one kid receives the Simon from the ship and does all this stuff, beats it, and then the ship takes off and he's a hero. So, classic young adult toy commercial. Of course, the first thing when we have to, and I'll just use our treatment or our sort of my brother and I's process for writing the treatment, which is essentially, we got to storyboards, but the treatment is where you would either write a treatment for yourself And that doesn't mean it would be as detailed, but if you were breaking down your own shoot, you'd still have to do this stuff. You just wouldn't have to write all the nonsense treatment language.
And the treatment you're doing really for the client, I mean, you may even be doing that at the stage where you're trying to land the job.
Well, it's for the client to sell ourselves as directors and our visions, but at the same time, it's also helping us to work out our ideas, because we have to be able to understand our ideas to pitch them to somebody.
And in my mind, a treatment consists definitely of still frames, kind of like storyboards, but storyboards are meant to have continuity and shot direction and specifics.
Yeah, these are like mood boards. And also, as a director, you have to have your story, your treatment style. Some people do a lot of copy and a little pictures. We sort of make ours like, we don't ever have copy on a blank background. It's always over a picture of some kind, to just really make it as visual as possible. And my brother tends to do the layout, even though, so we'll discuss it. He'll go find pictures and start laying out the design, and I'll keyboard cat away and get the sort of words together.
Does he work in Photoshop generally?
He'll make some stuff in Photoshop. We do stuff in Keynote. Keynote has a bunch of stuff, but obviously if you want to combine images or make unique images or anything like that, then yeah, you want to end up in Photoshop or Illustrator or something like that. So we started thinking about the script, and basically we have to come up with our own story, because the brief is just, some ad exec's idea, but it's the director's job to decide how far they want to take it away from that idea and make it their own. And that's the risk of whether or not you're going to get the job, because it might be a cool idea, but it might be too far out of the zone of what the thing is. So that's the dance. So in this case, we're like, great, sci-fi, anamorphic, immediately going to be anamorphic. So we start writing all the stuff describing what anamorphic is, because, ad exec people and that kind of stuff, they're not super versed in cinematic language. They just know what they like. So you start breaking it down, and we're using shots with horizontal flares and, showing 2:3:5 aspect ratios and things like that, and really, going all in on that.
Interesting. This is in your treatment. You've got them laid out that way.
Yeah, because we're like, I think we had a call with the client briefly. I think sometimes you'll get on a call and they'll be like, do you have any questions for us? And we'll say this, that, and the other things, what we're thinking, whatever. And you get a little back and forth, so you can kind of get a feel for what they're thinking before you write your treatment. As an aside, we didn't end up going anamorphic. And the only reason, and these are things you learn, and obviously we're talking about commercials here and not specifically visual effects, although there were visual effects and motion graphics in the spot. The reason is because the Simon game is a circle, right? It's round. And they were like, oh, anamorphic is great, but is it going to stay round? And we were like, shit, I don't know. If it's like dead center in the frame, probably, but then you can't rack focus at all, because the thing's going to go sideways. So
an anamorphic lens is an oblong zoom lens, effectively. It is.
Well, it's not a zoom per se. It just has an element that's twice as wide in viewpoint, but squeezes that image, and you end up with an oval bokeh in the background.
You also have to deal with the fact that means the things can be letterboxed, right?
Right. And so the letterboxing then comes into, we're getting a little digression here, but the letterbox then comes into, hey, FYI, we have to deliver a 4:3 safe version of this spot, because they're afraid someone in European country or Middle Eastern country X only has a 4:3 TV still. And my argument, and my brother and I are fairly open with our clients to a detriment sometimes. And we were like, look, anyone who still has a 4:3 TV is not buying this item, at least in our estimation. So maybe we could skip it. They're like, yeah, maybe, but yeah, no. So yeah, we ended up with a 16:9 framing for 4:3, which kind of sucks, right? Because then you don't have to, but you kind of got to cram some stuff a little more center than you normally would. And those are challenges, you have to communicate to your DP and right. Other things that that you're going to have to deal with, which obviously affects your visual language. So we wrote the treatment, allowing us to mentally storyboard it. And then to your comment earlier, things being looser on set versus, super dialed in. Clients, specifically in commercial, you always do storyboards, because the clients, it's a dance between the client expectation and the production company's management of the client.
Oh yeah, it becomes like your contract, so that literally on set they can say, wait, we wanted you can
Right,
say,
and you're like,
look.
hey, in the pre-production meeting, we showed you the storyboards and you signed off on them, so these are the X numbers of frames we're going to shoot. So in our case, and this is where it gets dicey, we won the job. We had a pre-production meeting. Luckily, we shot it in New York here, or in New Jersey. Of course, it's a night shoot, and we shot it on the summer solstice, which happens to be the shortest amount of night all year, which is super smart. So start wide. We'll get into this, but start wide and tight. In the pre-production meeting, is when you sit with the clients and you literally talk through the entire shoot. The director walks everybody through the shoot. We're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. You have a preliminary schedule from your AD who's broken down your storyboards and understands how you need to move the teams around. Luckily, we were in a cul-de-sac, one house, interior, and then the rest was exterior in a cul-de-sac. So there weren't any company moves, just camera, department moves. So that was much easier. In the pre-production meeting, we're talking, and we had sections of the storyboards where I wouldn't use the word blank, but they were much less descriptive. And so when we got to that part of the thing, because they wanted to make like a 2-minute version that they were going to maybe play in movie theaters. So we were like, great, we can stretch it out some places. We're not, this is going to be great. We're going to make you guys like a little movie. And they were like, oh, we're so excited. So we had sections of the storyboard left sort of loose where we knew we were going to do just a bunch of like handheld coverage. So, it started in the house, the kids watching TV, the lights go down, lights cut off, and the TV has a message from the aliens, which is the Simon ship. And we had gone through previs, not moving previs, but model, signed off on model designs of the ship and what it was going to look like beforehand. We had the Molecule here in New York doing the visual effects, and they were awesome. And they sent us a bunch of cool ships, and then we would go back and forth and, with us and the client. So we knew what the ship was going to look like, so you could have references on set. So in the storyboards, it's like we start inside, and then the boy goes outside, he meets the girl, they connect, they go, she cheers him on, while he beats Simon, and love, prevails, or whatever is happening, right? So in the storyboard and in our heads, we saw the whole spot, right? As you do as a director, you see the whole spot in your head. You know the angles that you're at least going to try for. Scouts and other availabilities and things always change that. But you see what you want. And obviously, we've had our DP team or Savan on that one. We did, a lot of work together to, be on the same page, but also leave room for experimentation, because you can't be too rigid. And that's the dance of commercials, is they want to see exactly the frame you drew, which is never really possible, because you're drawing an ideal frame in an idealized world that is sometimes not able to be executed. And that's, again, part of the trick is getting them to sign off on something they're going to like, but something close to what you can execute, especially given, any number of things that change on set before the shoot that may have been like, oh yeah, we totally could have shot that, but oh man, that house isn't available and it doesn't have a corner that looks like that. So we're going to have to shoot against that window, which now changes a whole bunch of art department stuff, because we can only shoot that during the day, but it's supposed to be at night, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we had this section where the kid was going to get up and we were going to do 2 coverage passes. We were going to handhold follow from behind and follow him all the way out of the house, down the street, into the cul-de-sac, cut. And then we were going to follow him leading, looking at his face, all the way out the door, follow him, cut. I see, X number of things of action happening in my head. I do my best to communicate to the client. They buy off on the idea that this is going to be a more fluid area, which means they don't know actually exactly what coverage we're going to get in those moments, in that 30 seconds or whatever it is. That's a dangerous game, because that's where your day is going to come to a grinding halt if they don't like it on set. Because so what ended up happening was we did that coverage. And when we were done with it, I realized, because I come from an editorial background, I can edit in my head, and so does my brother, while we're directing. So I know how to put the spot together while we're shooting, and I know what I'm missing or what I would like to have that wasn't, that maybe I'm not missing, but I'm on the day you see something and you're like, oh, that would be cool. The thing you're going to think about next week when you're in the edit room. And you're like, shit, I wish we shot an insert of the guy, scratching his knee or whatever you need. So what I realized in our description of coverage to the client was that we never connected the girl from the house across the street appropriately. So just on the fly, I grab Teamer and I go, dude, come over here. I tell him what I want. He communicates to G&E, Grip and Electric, hey, just slide that light to the left 20 feet. We're going to end up looking that direction. Don't change anything. Just, slide it over, whatever. And I'm starting to talk to the actress. Hey, we need to just get you doing this. And Doug, my producer, comes over and goes, dude, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, oh, we need this shot. We're going to need it for editorial. He's like, yeah, but it's not in the boards. And I was like, yeah, but we need it. And he said, he's like, yeah, but now you've opened up a can of worms now, because now they have something they can critique and that they want to critique. And now they're going to start talking about it. And this is bad. You don't want to give the client, you just want them to be there to approve what you're doing. And the more creative input you give them, and this isn't like a negative to clients or agencies, it's just, you have a lot to do on set, and the more that things can get in your way, even if they're self-imposed like I did. That wasn't anyone, nobody did that but me. And I said, hey, we have to shoot it. He's like, well, you don't have to, but yes, I understand that we need it. I'll go smooth everybody out, but you have 10 minutes and then we're moving on. We're like, copy that. And he's like, and don't ever do that again. And I'm like, well, no promises, but yeah, I hear you, man. Obviously I respect him.
It sounds like you could hear that he was right in a way.
I knew he was right 100%, but I knew I was right too. And so it was obviously he supersedes me. He's the EP. It's his company and his client. But at the same time, he's an artistic person and has been a director himself. So he knows what I'm talking about. So it's, it's a give and take. And again, just to clarify, there was no yelling and no argument. This was a conversation, because there is no place on any set for yelling, screaming, or anything physical. It's unnecessary.
Yeah.
There's nothing productive comes from that ever. You may have had a great shoot, and 2 years later, something unproductive comes from that. But something unproductive will come from behaving like that on set, especially as the director. Go walk away for 5 minutes and come back. But the crew doesn't need to see you, being a big baby.
What do you think of as, and I'm going to transition now to even smaller productions like Danko Jones music videos, but with Elijah Wood in them. But let's just talk about what you consider to be what makes a good director, and a really fun, what are the most fundamental things that make a director succeed on a shoot?
I'm going to quote Quentin Tarantino, which I will never, ever do again, but because I think he makes great movies, but he's also a lunatic. I read an article with him where he met, and I can't remember the director he met, but he was at a film festival as a younger guy, and he said to the director, how do you make your movies look the way they look? I try to make stuff and it doesn't look good or whatever. I forget what the exact thing was, but he was just as you do, you question somebody whose work you like and you say, how does your stuff look so good? You're the director. What do you do? And that person told him, your job as the director is to have a vision of what you want and communicate it to your department heads. And that's it. And that's obviously a very stripped down and basic version of the concept. But in reality, sure, you have the auteur theory and all that, and that's very few and far between.
And the auteur theory being the idea that everything that you see on screen is really the result of the vision of the director.
One person, yeah. And that does happen, but for the most part, and if you look at the credits of the historical credits of a director that you really like, it's very often they're working with the same people. And there's a reason for that, be it actors or department heads, is because it's a collaborative process. If I have a vision, I need to go to my art department and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Now, it could just be words. I could make a 100-page lookbook. I could cut a video. I could give them references in any number of mediums. But my job is to communicate to them exactly what I want so that they can then be creative, interpret my ideas, and return to me with options that would be, hopefully, if we've communicated properly, options that are expanded upon what I said and should be, hopefully, things that I never even said or thought of. Then I have even more options, and then you could spiderweb into a million options, and that's where creative control comes in. But the point is effective communication to your department heads, which include actors, is really all you have to do. You just have to have the vision. And by vision, it doesn't mean it has to be Oscar winning. It just has to be what you want. Some people make good movies and good choices. Some people make bad movies and bad choices. But those are still their choices as a director.
Right. I mean, my concisive response is decisiveness, which comes from understanding what you're making and the intention of it. I'm kind of pulling it all in here to also say that, and I looked this up because I didn't know who said it, and I'm not kidding. I think it's Walter Murch. So we're doing a lot of recalls
Full circle,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that the director is the film's immune system. Have you ever heard this one? So
No.
The idea is basically being the director is not, in many cases, and I think I think music videos and super run and gun projects might be an exception somewhat to this, but that on a larger production, like you're talking about, where you have departments and people, you have somebody in charge of, say, set decoration, you have somebody, you've got your lighting crew, you've got your camera crew, etc. You are not really in a creative position as the director. You're taking the creativity of all of these departments, costume, all of them are doing their best to give you all kinds of material, and your job is to go, yep, that belongs. Oh, I love that in the film. Nope, that does not belong in this movie. We've got that. We need to move on, etc. And it's creative in a way because you are creating a film, but you're doing it by basically making about 1 million decisions in a given day.
Yep, pretty much.
on what's offered to you, by your talent, the environment, but also by the people working with you on your team. And so you rehire people because you know that you don't have to explain yourself as much. So for somebody going more low budge, how does the equation change?
I mean, hopefully you're not doing everything yourself, which means you still have people to collaborate with, and those people don't necessarily have to be department heads. Even if, like, we've done, those Danko Jones videos, we didn't have a wardrobe person, so we would tell the cast, hey, bring these 5 things and anything else related you can think of. You know what I mean? So your cast then becomes the wardrobe person. Our DPs were also the gaffers, lighting. So, I'm communicating multiple things or they're communicating to me, hey, it would be cool if we did this. And you go, oh, that would be cool. And especially on that project, I think the first Danko Jones, Full of Regret, was the first one we did. That one, this is the perfect run and gun, scenario. The band, we were friends with the band. They called us up and said, hey, can you do a music video for us? We said, sure. They said, great. We need you to be in LA in a week. Obviously the first thing we did was call Brandon. We locked in our DP, and he's like, I'll get you like a 4-person crew because we didn't have a lot of money, and we'll just make it happen. In order to satisfy the requirement of doing something super creative in a week's time, our concept for the music video was we're going to make a trailer for a movie that doesn't exist. But we decided that we were going to record dialogue that we would potentially, we're going to record it all, and then when we're in the editorial, we would determine if it really worked to duck the audio of the music video out for audio of the from the on-set audio. So I went ahead and wrote no storyboards. This was this is the ultimate run and gun thing. So in that week, on the plane flight over, which we landed like 4 days before we were going to shoot, I wrote a 1-page story of the characters that each of our actors were going to play, and then just a general outline what their action was in terms of what they were trying to achieve. The band had created a persona about themselves in their songs and in their song titles and on stage. So we sort of used those characters that they had made, or mostly the lead singer, Danko Jones, his character that is in all his lyrics. And we knew all the band's songs, all their records, all their lyrics. We didn't have a location. We were shooting Saturday and Sunday, and we didn't have a location, and it was Friday. We didn't have any scenes. All we had was this one page that I wrote that I gave to the actors to say, hey, this is what your character does, and this is what your character does. And so we had all those things, but we didn't know what we were going to do. Like, we didn't have a location. At the last minute, we found this location downtown, 20 sets, 20 like pre-existing sets. So we literally on our scout on Friday, like walked through with Brandon and our producer and just started making up storylines in each room. So we would just say, okay, like in the medical room, this is going to be a Marathon Man thing. We're just going to go for each of the things we need to do. Yeah, so we literally went through. There was no storyboard. There was no anything. I mean, that is the ultimate zero planning shoot.
What do you see? And I mean, this can be a kind of a quickie, but in terms of somebody who maybe is coming from some part of the graphics side or post, just integrating more shooting, like where would you start even? Or how do you think about somebody getting to know the camera?
The way a camera is going to move that you're holding on your iPhone is totally different than like a 10 or 12 pound camera that has a lens that protrudes out. You know, someone hand holding a camera, you can actually tell how big the camera is from the way the camera moves.
And yet, the latest round of iPhone software is stabilizing shots to where back in the day when you're shooting with a VX1000 or some, early stage DV camera, you actually had to weigh down the rig if you wanted it to look filmic. If you were running around with this thing, there's no way it would.
So yeah, to your point, obviously you want to start moving into learning, getting your hands on and learning how to use, different camera builds, if only to also then get different file formats and other things outside of the creative aspect. There's still more technical stuff to like, how do I deal with an R3D or an ARRI RAW file or ProRes RAW or Blackmagic RAW or whatever flavor of the whatever happens to be out that month, and understanding that workflow, because I think one of my brother and I's, benefits is having gone through pretty much every aspect of pre-production through delivery, having done jobs through that entire process, but also having, done only jobs in certain portions of that. Understanding all those, the spokes of that wheel allows me to make better decisions for myself, much less for other people.
Right. So the more pieces of the process you understand, the more options you've got, and the more opinions you can exercise in terms of how it's done. So, I mean, that speaks to both the way you've kind of handled your career, being willing to jump in to, rather than being highly specialized, being willing to jump into new things, and also that curiosity to really learn and go deep.
I do enjoy the bit of the white knuckling when you're like, yeah, I could totally do that. And you're like, this has to be done in like 5 hours and I don't know how we're going to do that. And you're like, well, it's going to figure it out.
Yeah. So to wrap things up, I'm just curious about trends because you're entrepreneurially pretty smart guys, you and your brother. I mean, part of the switching around is also just seeing new opportunities. VR, it breaks a lot of what you know how to do with a single camera, and yet it opens up all kinds of things. And that's one that is still very much in its infancy. Now that you've spent quite a bit of time with it, do you see that as significantly expanding in terms of live event, the kind of stuff you're doing? I get it. It makes sense. And if not that, or even if that combined with something else, I'm just curious kind of what trends you're interested in these days.
We are moving pretty heavily into volumetric capture and content. can't talk about all of it. There's multiple approaches. There's none that have, there's still processing issues with that kind of stuff in terms of, capture and data and whatever. But volumetric video specifically, we did a project over the summer that I'm not sure, and I hate using these sort of terms or caveats, I'm not sure it had been specifically been done before. I'm not sure it's going to end up being public at any point, but we captured 16 8K or 6 to 8K viewpoints of video, and then used some proprietary and non-proprietary tool sets to create volumetric video that you could walk around in.
Wow.
That was totally broken and not really working when we finished it, quote unquote, in terms of what we were supposed to deliver. But the promise of what is doable eventually, or the conceptually, was mind-blowing.
So it's the grail of live action full 6DOF VR.
Yes. It's like, do you want to see a Star Wars movie where you're standing in the movie and you can walk over to the main character and stand next to them while they're talking? Like, it's super nuts. To me, that is something that I think and hope would be the thing that everyone really takes to. Now you have something like the Insta360 One X, which is like the size of smaller than your cell phone, back-to-back, 180 lenses that stitches on your phone, and it'll do time lapses or, bullet time or all these things. And the thing to all this technology is all these technologies are dependent on other technologies that are being developed regardless of VR. Screen technologies in terms of higher resolution, DPI, and all that stuff our
cameras getting smaller.
Sensor technology changing, wireless technology, LiDAR and depth calculations based on, pixel velocity and all that kind of stuff. Certainly computational algorithms on video and those kind of things. But all those things are sort of, unless someone's, strictly designing a spherical sensor, that's a ball or something, like that's obviously purpose made. But so you have companies, and certainly companies like NVIDIA, that are going way deep on VR, even still, and their computing platform and GPU platforms are, exponentially getting faster and cheaper because Moore's law still applies. It means the medium will continue in some capacity inherently, because there will just be technology to support it. How companies can acquire that technology and implement it into actual products for that market, who knows?
I guess my final question would be, what excites you the most in VR? Like, what have you seen as the thing that you can do in VR that no one would even know to ask for it because it has no parallel? An actor looking straight at camera in VR has a different power than, say, the Sergio Leone super close-up on film.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It really feels like it's an animal thing almost, like someone is actually looking you in the eye.
Well, the presence is totally different in a movie theater than it is in a headset.
Yeah, but it's also like the proscenium effect. Like, anytime you're seeing something on a screen with borders, you're like, oh, I'm looking at a close-up shot of a guy's eyes, not, oh, this guy's looking me right in the eyes. And then the other one, I think would be in the realm of what you guys are doing, which is like kind of telepresence at events, just getting kind of a point of view on an event that you couldn't humanly, even if you went there.
To both of those points, I don't like the term cinematic combined with VR, which was kind of the thing a couple years ago, or conflates the word cinematic with 24 frames a second and 180 degree shutter and all, letterbox and lens flares and shit. And you can't do those things really in VR, nor do you want to. You want the highest frame rate you can get. Oftentimes it is a 360 degree shutter. There is a visual language to everything. It took film a while to get there. VR has never codified even one rule for me of any sort of visual language in VR, because I think there's a lot of either misconception or somebody telling you can't do something, but they haven't specifically done it or whatever. I just think that we haven't had that milestone moment in VR yet where someone says, I don't really know what was happening until this thing happened. Like, there hasn't been a thing where everyone goes, why didn't I think of that? Or I didn't know you could do that, or whatever. It's just, and like I said, there's been great work, but I don't think there's been that galvanizing moment.
So if you've never been on a set or part of a live shoot, I think there was solid real-world insight in this conversation into how that is done and what you gain by actually working with professionals and a plan. That said, if you prefer to keep things loose and improvisational, and you have the concept and the talent on your side, you can pull off, say, a music video, even if the talent is also used to Hollywood features. Finally, if you don't have experience in this area, it's worth finding someone you can trust who will be able to put together a team that can help you get as much value into your project as possible, whatever your budget. As always, thank you for listening.